From Washington, the McLaughlin Group, the American original. For over 3 decades, the sharpest minds, best sources, hardest talk.
Hello, welcome to another edition of the McLaughlin Group. I'm your host, Tom Rogan. This week's panelists are the familiar faces of Eleanor Clift, Clarence and Pat Buchanan. And our special guest this week is Matt Mackowiak, a conservative strategist. Welcome, Matt.
Thank you for having me.
On that note, we shall get to our first issue, which is issue 1, what transition?
If it has to wait until January 20th to get actually become operational, that's a shame, but maybe that's the only way to get it done.
With President Trump's legal challenges persisting, Joe Biden this week suggested that any effective transition of administrations might not begin until he becomes president on January 20th. President Trump certainly doesn't seem inclined to give up. In a litany of tweets this week, the president referenced what he alleged was election fraud in key swing states such as Georgia and Michigan. Trump also, quote-unquote, terminated his cybersecurity chief, Chris Krebs. Krebs had earned Trump's ire by suggesting the election was conducted successfully and without major fraud.
Pat, your thoughts on the latest on this roller coaster this week?
I think it's all going beautifully, Tom. Seriously. It is not going badly from the state of view of a democratic republic, which is deeply divided. You've got allegations that are being answered. You've got charges being made. Affidavits have been issued in court and judges have dealt with them. Serious allegations of fraud have been made and have not been proven. So I think the more of this that's laid out there and is answered, I think the better off in terms of having the whole country accept a decision. I do believe this. When the states start certifying and the electoral colleges certifies, by then certainly Joe Biden, who has a chance to be president, ought to be given the national security briefings. And I think the folks dealing with COVID-19, one group specialists and experts ought to be dealing with the others and working together on primary issue number 1, no matter who's in the White House on January 20th. But I wouldn't get too alarmed by what's going on. This is raucous democracy at its roughest.
Okay, Eleanor.
There's no doubt who will be president on January 20th. The lawsuits that are being advanced by the Trump team have no credibility. Rudy Giuliani, paired with Steve Bannon, who is awaiting trial for fraud after having been arrested aboard a Chinese billionaire's yacht, their legal maneuvering is amounting to nothing. In a courtroom, when asked if he's alleging fraud, Mr. Giuliani said no. So when he's under oath, he's at least smart enough not to lie. The president calling election officials, notably in areas where they've been counting the votes of Black people, to question the results and to urge them to hold out. I don't know whether I call it witness tampering, whatever it is. And Lindsey Graham also calling into Georgia and suggesting to the Republican Secretary of State there that he should find as many votes as he can to throw out. This is beyond raucous democracy. And I think it's dangerous because we are in the middle of a pandemic and the president refuses to turn over the keys to the kingdom. And mounting the delivery system of a vaccine, I give the president every bit of credit he wants for lighting the fire to get these vaccines on track. But they have to be delivered. Until they're in somebody's arm, they don't count.
Matt.
Well, I watched the press conference, the hour-and-a-half press conference, and it felt to me like it was sort of taking every possible thing and sort of throwing it at the wall and seeing what sticks. It would seem to me it would be a better strategy to take your very best arguments and make those arguments and leave aside, arguments related to Venezuela and Cuba and China, unless you have really, really solid evidence. What's bothered me about these election challenges is they haven't been all that serious, and they certainly haven't been handled by an all-star legal team. Senator Ted Cruz has said that he's told the president and Jared Kushner directly that if they're going to do this, they need to assemble the single best legal team that's ever been assembled, much like it was done in 2000 with the Bush team, to be highly credible in what you're presenting to the public and to make the very best legal arguments that are based on evidence. I don't dismiss some of these charges. We just had a woman in Texas, in Dallas, who was alleged to have committed something like 130 cases of voter fraud with mail ballots. So these things do happen, and I actually think it's a very positive thing if real evidence is secured and then presented, either to election authorities, legal authorities, or to courts. Trump it's not over yet. These legal challenges are going to go forward. The challenge he has is that the hill to climb is so large. In Florida in 2000, it was 500 or so votes in one state. In this case, you have Pennsylvania, which has, I think, a 65,000 vote threshold now. You have Georgia, Arizona, Nevada, who each have somewhere between 10 and 30,000. Trump needs at least 2 of those states if it includes Pennsylvania. And without Pennsylvania, he needs all 3 of them. So the challenge is significant. I do agree with Pat with Eleanor, that Joe Biden is highly, highly, highly likely to be sworn in on January 20th. The question is Trump going to prevail in court in any meaningful way in any of these states? We just have to see what happens.
Clarence, the press conference that we saw this week with Rudy Giuliani and some of the other members of President Trump's legal team was to Trump voters wonderful red meat, and I think to non-Trump voters somewhat absurd. But do you see a legal pathway, because that's what it ultimately comes down to, as Matt suggests, for the president to retain his office?
Well, people a lot more expert than I, Republican and Democrat, I mean legal experts, say no, that there's no path that Trump has opened up. I'm like Matt, I'm gloriously unimpressed by the charges that have been made so far and the absence of evidence of serious voter fraud. And I'm from Chicago. I do take voter fraud seriously as a charge, but I also know that very seldom do you have any of these controversies that amount to very many votes. Matt touched on this too, that the amount of votes or elections in dispute here would not give Trump a victory, even if you found, I mean, we're talking thousands and tens of thousands of votes that would have to be made up for Trump to have a shot at winning the Electoral College right now. And what is amazing to me is how it appears Trump made the charge verbally and then sicked his lawyers on everybody, saying, go out and find me some voter fraud, because it's really been absurd out there, unless you're into a lot of comedy in the courts, and most judges are not. So I don't think this is really going anywhere, but I'm still disturbed by the fact that our government right now is in transition. That's got it in sort of suspended animation, if you will. That's not good for national security. It's just making a joke out of the COVID fight, and that's no joke. And we need to have a serious transition here. And it's not too late for President Trump to take Joe Biden's advice and try to go out graciously and leave fond memories when he leaves office.
All right, so about 30 seconds each. Pat, do your point, but I also want to ask you, how do you think this lawsuit process affects the Georgia Senate runoffs?
Well, first, the Georgia is the one state, I believe it's 14,000, where there might be a chance that you could turn things around, but they've only got some 2,000 votes, I think, that are really contested. You don't have the 3 states needed to turn over the presidency. How's it going to affect the battle down there in Georgia? Frankly, I think the battle in Georgia would be better off once that's certified and decided, if people go in there and focus on the future and on the agenda and on the opposition candidates, where the Republicans have a great case, rather than focusing on the election, or even some conservatives or many conservatives who probably voted with good hearts for Trump now think he lost.
Okay, Eleanor.
And will pretending he won get those voters to the polls? Will Trump go into Georgia and campaign? What a come down that would be, going into a state that he believes betrayed him and campaigning for these underlings who doesn't consider his equal. So, it's all about him. So he'll do what he thinks is best for him. And the notion that this president can keep getting away from this, and getting away with this, and we indulge it, when there is no evidence. Even if some woman in Texas, 130 cases, that's not going to change the state. And besides, Trump won that state. So what's the point except to undermine Joe Biden as a legitimate president and to keep fighting with him about that, just like he did with Barack Obama and the crowd size. I mean, I think in the end, once this president leaves office, he will be a loser. He will not be a winner who got cheated out of his rightful reelection.
30 seconds, Matt.
Yeah, I mean, you ask a great question about Georgia, because if Trump's base is feeling that elections are not held with integrity, particularly in the state of Georgia, where there's a challenge going on, that could dampen their enthusiasm to turn out in the runoff. And the stakes in the January 5th runoff elections for the 2 U.S. Senate seats could not be higher. Democrats win those two, you have a 50-50 tie. Vice President-elect Kamala Harris would break the tie, would give Chuck Schumer control of the floor, would allow them to confirm some judges and cabinet appointees. It would be very significant. So I think Republicans are hoping we can get past this pretty quickly.
Clarence, 30 seconds.
Well, let me just say that Democrats showed their power in Georgia for the general election. I just hope they have that same kind of enthusiasm now for a runoff. Usually, Democrats tend to drop off at a faster rate than Republicans do. We'll see if they can defy that trend this time.
We'll
Tom, one last thing. One last thing. You're going to have states certify starting next week, which is going to change the burden of proof that the Trump campaign is trying to look at here. And then you're going to have the Electoral College meet, I think, on December 14th or 15th. So that's really the last point of this.
The next will be.
We're moving on. We're moving on. Issue 2, Biden's plans.
The legislation passed by the Democratic House calls for immediate $10,000 forgiveness of student loans. It's holding people up. They're in real trouble. They're having to make choices between paying their student loan and paying their rent, those kinds of decisions. It should be done immediately.
Joe Biden unveiled more of his governing agenda this week, moving towards the Democratic left on student loan forgiveness. But as Biden grapples with the prospect of a GOP Senate, some analysts suggest that he'll have to choose between executive actions and ensuing court battles, or a more moderate negotiating stance.
Eleanor, your thoughts on President-elect Joe Biden beginning to lay out his administrative priorities?
Well, so far, he's followed through on everything he ran on. Getting the pandemic under control is his first priority. He has a pandemic task force put in place. He had a press conference this week with 10 governors, half of them Republican. They all congratulated him on his win. They were all in accord and trying to get the government ramped up to deliver the vaccine. He is calling for a COVID relief package, which would include some student loan relief. At least that's how it's been written on the Democratic side. And he's been announcing his appointments. And he said before Thanksgiving or shortly thereafter, he would name a Treasury Secretary who he said would be welcomed by all sides of the political spectrum within the Democratic Party, progressives and centrists, or whatever you want to call them. There's also some talk that he is going to name a HHS, Health and Human Services Secretary, pretty quickly, since that person would be heavily involved in the pandemic control. And speculation is focused on the New Mexico governor, Lujan Grisham, who happens to be Hispanic. So I think he's mindful of the politics, and he's mindful of getting people in there who know what they're doing. So I think so far, so good. No big battles, except within the Democratic caucus because of the loss of seats in the House.
Pat.
I think he ought to be mindful, Eleanor, that Mitch McConnell has got veto power till January 20th, and depending upon what happens in Georgia, may have veto power through the Biden administration. Now, Medicare for all is dead. The new Green New Deal is dead. Biden's $4 trillion tax increase is dead. And anything he proposes, any ideas, COVID-19, I think Republicans will deal on that, no doubt about it. But as Max said earlier, we're talking about Georgia. If Georgia gives control to the Senate to Mitch McConnell and the Republicans, and he's not going to sign on to any liberal legislation or any major legislation where the Republicans don't get a major share and that doesn't partly reflect their views. So Clarence. Mitch McConnell is the guy to be mindful of.
Okay, Clarence.
Well, that last line that Pat gave was key. What will please both Republican and Democratic views? If anybody is familiar with what both sides want, it's Joe Biden, and he plans to go after that. We've already talked about infrastructure is one of those deals that both sides want, but they, for some reason, haven't been able to get in either the Obama or the Trump administrations. They also have, they both have an interest in dealing with healthcare, which was much more successful for Democrats in 2018 than this year, but it hasn't gone away. People still want better coverage than they've been getting, the protections against pre-existing conditions being a bar to coverage. And the student loan issue is an interesting one. Joe Biden wants that because, for one thing, it's a very real issue, and it could be an economic stimulus, and also it's a payback of sorts to younger voters and the college-educated voters who supported the Democratic Party quite heavily. I agree with Pat that Mitch McConnell isn't going to lie down happily and let something like that pass, but it's also the kind of issue that Democrats can use to hold against Republicans in terms of not answering public needs and fostering more gridlock. So fun and games ahead, right, Pat?
Matt, let me ask you, we talk about student loan relief, and there is a Democratic sort of consensus on that, and yet we do see a vast majority of liberal professors predicating towards the Democratic Party, sustaining above inflation cost increases. And also, I would think, quite a lot of Americans who say, I didn't go to college, so why am I paying, or at least why is the deficit accruing onto me, so that we can give people who are going to have greater earning opportunity in their life anyway?
Yeah, I mean, not only that, you have, people who've been paying off their student loans. Saving up money, not going on trips, not taking, going out for dinner, meeting their obligations. And so this is really a slap in the face to those people, some of whom are very much working class. So I don't know that I understand how it would be all that stimulative when you consider the other options you could utilize with that kind of expenditure. So if he does that through executive action, that'll be popular with college and recent college students and recent college graduates, no question. But listen, your core question is the right one, and that is, what can Biden get done legislatively? Washington is going to be very different on January 20th. You're going to have a more narrow Republican Senate majority, but presumably you're going to have a Republican Senate majority. You're going to have a far more narrow House Democratic majority. You're going to have probably an 8-seat Democratic majority. You had, I think, 10 Democrats vote against Pelosi as Speaker 2 years ago. So she is not going to go far left, not going to be able to go far left on her agenda. The Problem Solvers Caucus is going to have enough members to block her. So Biden is going to be forced to either deal with McConnell on a bipartisan basis, which is going to anger his left wing, or he's going to be forced to do things primarily through executive orders, which, as we know, are temporary and can be overtaken by the next administration.
All right, got to move on to issue 3, 2,500.
By January 15th, 2021, our forces, their size in Afghanistan, will be 2,500 troops. Our force size in Iraq will also be 2,500 by that same date. This is consistent with our established plans and strategic objectives, supported by the American people, and does not equate to a change in U.S. policy or objectives.
It might be supported by the American people, but some observers suggest that President Trump's reduction in U.S. force levels in Afghanistan and Iraq is not consistent with his stated strategic objectives. The troop cuts amount to 2,000 in Afghanistan and 500 in Iraq. U.S. forces in both nations are now engaged mostly in supporting roles.
Clarence, I think the majority of the American people do want the troops home. One of the things I find concerning, though, is that we have lost 4 Americans in Afghanistan, 4 in Iraq this year, but that is far lower than those dark days of 2006-07 in Iraq and 2009 to 13 in Afghanistan. If we are there to support, as we are, an aviation intelligence, things that the Afghans and Iraqis can't do, and we've given up on Jeffersonian democracy, Does this make sense?
It has been a controversial matter inside the Pentagon and among the troops as well. Do we want to pull out now all of a sudden? And it seems rather odd for the president to announce this now that he is undoubtedly on his way out, although he may not realize it yet. Nevertheless, there's legitimate concern. I mean, how many countries now have gone into Afghanistan and come back out as losers? I hate to see us follow in that sad tradition, but that may be what is happening here. And if everything does fall apart after President Trump has left office and after he has pulled the troops out, then it's Joe Biden's problem. I can only imagine that's what's going on in Trump's head right now.
Matt, your thoughts?
Yeah, this is a tough one because on the one hand, you don't want to give back what we've gained by being in Afghanistan for so long. And there clearly is a need for a continued presence at some level to do the things you're talking about: intelligence gathering, training, aviation, et cetera. So, a horizon force might make sense over time. On the other hand, President Trump is clearly a non-interventionist. He wants to have fewer troops in the region, both in Afghanistan and in the Middle East, when he leaves office than when he got there. And clearly the American public does not continue to support this mission. It is time to bring our troops home as safely as we can by maintaining what we've gained and by giving Afghanistan the best chance to be an independent nation that protects its citizens from terrorism. So this is a difficult one because you have, armed services leaders who have really spoken up against this. They believe it does make America and its interests more at risk, and that you have to take into consideration. On the other hand, this had to end. It has to end at some point, and President Trump's the first person who has really recognized that and done something about it.
Eleanor.
Oh, he's not the first person who has recognized that war has to end, but is now the time when the talks are going on between the Taliban and the Afghan government. It undercuts the Afghan government and our allies who are in Afghanistan with us. The Taliban has increased its incursions. They feel emboldened by this. The military is opposed. Republican and Democrats alike are saying now's not the time to exit the Middle East. These are not combat troops. They are basically, as Matt pointed out, they were there for intelligence reasons and to protect and give us a base in that area of the world. He's only doing it because he's looking for grand gestures on his way out the door that will stick it to Biden. Biden's not going to come into office, I don't think, and say, I'm going to put more troops back into Afghanistan. That wouldn't be a very fun thing to do. What I would bet is the military will slow walk this. It's extracting troops. It's a huge logistical exercise, and I don't think they're going to be in any big hurry.
Pat, one of the things that I'm sure you might say, what have we gained? And in many ways be correct, but I think in Afghanistan, look, we're supporting city control there. There's a counterterrorism incentive versus ISIS and the remnants of Al-Qaeda. Iraq, the new prime minister there, Al-Kadhimi, is the first nationalist-minded Iraqi prime minister, taking on the Iranians to a degree. So I would say there are positives. Why am I wrong?
There are positives. I mean, it's better that the present government is in power in Afghanistan and Kabul than what's going to happen when the Americans all leave. Now, look, I disagree with you to this extent. I mean, you take 2,000 out by January 15th, I don't see that government in Kabul really surviving long. I was around, as a matter of fact, I was in the White House during the years run up to the fall of Saigon. I'll be honest, Tom, I mean, it is tough. We got to be looked this straight in the face. Barack Obama had 100,000 American troops in Afghanistan. And if they couldn't do away with the Taliban and win enough time and years for the government there to survive on his own, can 4,500 or 2,500 do it? This is, I think we're headed, and we ought to look it in the face, we're headed for a real possibility of a Saigon-type finish in Kabul.
Let's hope not, but on that note, Pat, let's go to predictions.
That was my prediction.
Okay.
Joe Biden will preside over the fall of Kabul to the Taliban.
Okay, all right, Eleanor.
My prediction is all the talk this week about Biden is not going to press for investigating or prosecuting Trump after he leaves office. First of all, it's not entirely up to the president. He says he would leave it to his Justice Department. But I would agree that this is the job for the Southern District of New York and the Attorney General of New York.
Okay.
And the president has plenty of legal issues to face having to do with tax evasion and fraud that could well land him in some sort of dire
Hot water.
circumstances a la Michael Cohen.
Okay, Matt.
So the Biden transition is in an unusual position. Without knowing whether they're going to have the Senate majority, they probably cannot really name that many cabinet secretaries until after January 5th. They can make some decisions. It sounds like he might even announce Treasury Secretary soon. I'll predict that it's going to be Janet Yellen, the former Fed chair. I think that's a safe choice. But I think they're going to wait on a lot of these cabinet slots. Maybe they line up some of the national security ones. You may see some senators get selected on the belief that they can get the votes they need to get the majority to get confirmed. But this is a unique challenge for the Biden team to identify who the Democratic Party is willing to support, but who can get through the Senate. And since they don't know who will control the floor until January 6th, probably, they're going to be delayed.
Clarence.
I may be wrong, but I predict Rudy Giuliani will change his hair dye brand after his current favorite apparently failed him under the hot lights of a news conference.
Okay, very good. I'm going to echo Eleanor. I do think it would be a grotesque mistake morally and strategic terms to withdraw from Afghanistan. But I do believe that the Afghan government or some form therein would be able to hold Kabul and some of the major cities, if for only the reason that the demographic makeups of Afghanistan do not by population and power sit solely with the Taliban. Thank you for watching. We will see you next week.